We're starting the session 3 of our conference on collective emotion. My name is Gloria Origgi. I'm a philosopher at the Institut Nico in Paris. And session 3 will be on mass gatherings, emergence, dynamics, and social control. So we are starting a little late. We're going to start like in 2 minutes at 20 past 2. Laurence Kaufmann will be our first speaker. She is a sociologist of communication, and she works at the University of Lausanne and at the Institut Marcel Mauss at the École de in Paris. So the title of her communication is From Social Emotions to Collective Emotions, Public Events as Emotional Test.
So as Gloria said, I am a sociologist of communication. So that's why my point of view maybe is slightly different from the other one today. Because my main topic is public discourses. So just to put it briefly, I would like to emphasize the distinction between social emotions and collective emotion first, and my second step will be to distinguish between collective emotion and what I would call public emotions. So from an analytical point of view, the social shaping of emotion intervenes on several levels. On a phenomenological level, that of the self-labeling that helps identifying the flow of sensations and feelings as the normal, typical exemplar of registered state of mind, like anger, indignation, disgust, shame, etc. And those phenomenal properties, which refer to what it is like to feel such or such emotion, are linked to the semantic properties of emotional concepts. It's something that cultural anthropologists have a lot emphasized, where some emotional concepts are hyperconized in a culture, such as shame in Japanese culture. Other emotions, such as regret in American culture, are hypoconized and ignored to the point of disappearing from the collective mindscape. But the social, and it's the third level of social shaping of emotion, the social shaping of emotion also intervenes on what we could be called the dramaturgical level of their public expression. Social actor adjust their public behavior to what is expected in such or such situation. And at last, I would say it's the more specific topic of sociology of communication. The social shaping of emotion intervenes on the pragmatic level of the situated course of action, what emotion can do and make people do in a given interaction depends on the recognition and uptake by the addressees. So if the public expression of a given emotion does not trigger the emotional response it's supposed to afford, like eliciting a laugh in response to sadness, anger in response to compassion, the emotional expression fails or misfires. So to obtain what pragmatists call the appropriate uptake, emotion must respond to felicity conditions socially defined qui establish what counts as a justified object of emotion, and who has the right to be affected in such or such situation. A good example is the fact that a journalist, for instance, is not supposed to get emotional when he presents the news report. In Switzerland, the journalist was fired because he was too moved when he presented a situation of war. So the mark of the social nature of emotion is multiform. The socialness of emotions lies in the social relevance of the emotional self-labeling, the social adjustment of the emotional expression to the situation, the social adequacy between the expression of the emotion and the intended audience, and last, the social credibility of the emotional subject. So how we can switch from social emotion to collective emotion, or in which ways and at which level those social emotions can be deemed collective. I would say that the emotion elicited by public events are collective when they involve, we saw that this morning with Miko, collective emotions have a kind of self-referential component. They involve the feeling, the knowledge or the belief of their sharedness, actual or potential. This feeling of sharedness is important situation where a group of individuals face a public event, whether this event is unexpected, like an earthquake or a terrorist attack or a flash mob, or when this event is a ritual, like a religious, political, or cultural. And another characteristic of collective emotion, from my point of view, is the pragmatic distinction. It's what collective emotion do and make people do. And this action of collective emotion is twofold. We would say that collective emotion call for the existence of a collective subject whose members are aligned with one another. The second, they create a certain kind of social relationships, including social or collective membership, and create, it's a very important point, they create new action tendencies. Given the imbrication of these two dimensions, phenomenological and pragmatic, we will treat them together. So I would like to characterize, from a phenomenological standpoint, collective emotion as a specific experience, which is an experience of alignment. I will explain why I speak of alignment. But a very important point first is to insist that the speaking of collective emotion is speaking of the fact that others feel or might feel the same emotion. And it's in a way problematic, because as Julie Grèzes and colleagues point out, emotional similarity is not the default response to the perception of emotional displays. In numerous situations, the perception of another display of anger, for instance, is likely to trigger fear or submission, but not anger. So a very important difference between individual and collective emotions is that individual emotions contribute to shape complementary roles and to establish differential relationships, like contempt is completed by shame, pride by envy, and so on. So individual emotions have very often a complementary structure. By contrast, collective emotion, in a first step at least, force us to follow what we could call the similarity road. By definition, collective emotion involve the awareness of constituting a unity with others, to become one, in short, to feel as a single body, to take up the expression of Margaret Gilbert. So if collective emotion differ from individual emotion, they also differ from collective intentions. Collective intentions occur whenever individuals take into account the actions of others. to play in symphony, for instance, individuals must carry out different and complementary action to achieve their goal. So by way of consequence, speaking of collective emotion leaves us to leave aside an essential feature of individual intentionality, the fact that it contributes and it partakes in chains of complementary emotional displays, intention, and differential behavioral responses. So it leads me to suggest that collective emotions, unlike individual emotions, involve a distinctive psychological attitude, an attitude that I propose to call alignment. Contrary to more classical terms such as emotional assimilation or synchronization, the term alignment does not require that individuals genuinely experience similar emotions. It tolerates a mere public alignment of the expression of emotions. And we will see that it's useful for the data I have. Moreover, speaking of alignment rather than assimilation allows to emphasize the relational dimension of collective emotions. There are relations of alignment, more or less direct, more or less persistent. This alignment can be low or high level. As I will try to show very quickly, it can refer to automatic mimicry or emotional contagion or social appraisal or public alignment. I don't have the time. Okay, great. So to put it quickly, because here there are experts in the room, so it's a bit risky, but I would like just to emphasize what I find very interesting in the neuroscience reflection about what certain scholars call the neural we. So the collective emotion, as I said before, is an emotion that makes reference in a certain way to the emotions of others. But this reference can be implicit and automatic, like in the phenomena of sensory motor mimicry and shared neural representation form that form indeed a kind of primitive neural we. Why speaking of neural we? There are a lot of recent research showing that individuals tend to co-represent the action of the other when they perform tasks next to each other. And they keep track of what others do, even in situations of mere co-presence, like in the work of Sebans and colleagues. And because of this low-level automatic co-representation of others' viewpoints, actions available to me are colored in a way by the fact they are available to someone else in my group or in the situation. So we could hypothesize that just as people rapidly compute what others do or can do in the situation, we can also imagine that the individuals might rapidly compute what others feel in a kind of low-level social appraisal. I will explain what social appraisal means later. So, in this hypothesis, objects that would have high affective affordance for others would get a higher affordance for me. It's like it changed the level of the affordance of object or events around me. So it means that the presence of other potential sentient fellows would induce me to take into account their perspective and to produce co-representation or something like co-feelings. But as also shown by numerous studies, this kind of co-representation might occur only if there is a potential for joint action or for emotional sharedness. What others do or feel is relevant only if they can be regarded as sufficiently similar to us. So before it can ever function, the affective we mode presuppose something like the pre-intentional background sense of the other as a potential agent like oneself. It's the expression of John Searle. So emotion can be, we need to suppose the likeness of other individuals to take their feelings into account, even from a very low level of processing. So emotional mimicry or affective resonance is conditional, as shown by Dezecache and Ecole. It depends on both the nature of the emotional signal and the kind of relationship and affective linkage that relates the expressor of the emotion and the perceiver, like the work of Fischer shown. There is a kind of low-level appraisal of similarity without others before to co-represent them in a joint emotion or in a joint action. So if we keep following kind of architectures of the we, and the kind of alignment this involves, we can also distinguish what we could be called the phenomenal we. So it's very rough, and I leave the specialist like Miko, to open the black box. I just put everything in the black box about shared emotion. But what I would like to emphasize here is the fact that in this phenomenal we characterizing certain kinds of collective emotion, the agents are mutually aware of the fact that they have the same emotions. So their emotions, as Charles Taylor put it, are sharing, be shared. Of course, this feeling of sharedness can be more or less reflexive. Mere emotional contagion consists of basic mapping between self and other, but there are more reflexive collective emotions which are consciously informed by the fact that others feel or are presumed to feel the same way. And except in mere cases of emotional contagion, like feeling depressed with someone depressed, like Cacioppo and all have shown, the phenomenal we is based upon a specific mechanism of alignment, namely a process of social appraisal. Social appraisal are processes by which agents integrate information from others' emotional expressions into their own evaluation of the situation. And far from any kind of automatic mimicry, social appraisal is based upon a series of social cues. Other emotional displays are not always and automatically taken into account. For instance, individuals, like Fischer shown, individuals engage more often in social appraisal when they are uncertain about a situation, and individuals refer only to those who are trustworthy and reliable. In other words, collective emotions are not based upon blind alignments, but upon fine-tuned alignments that are conditional on different social cues. And we can also construe social appraisal as a form of deference. I defer to others the task of defining what deserves my affective attention, of evaluating the affective balance of the event, and of pointing to me the emotional responses that those events afford. If all emotions are appraisals, collective emotions integrate, as to speak, explicitly the mechanism of social appraisal. They involve, by definition, the adjustment of one's own emotions to others' emotional reaction, and hence integrates the reference or the deference to other as a kind of constitutive property. It is this kind of social difference that explains, if we follow the work of Ivan Ermakov, who has published a very interesting book about what he calls collective abdications. And Ivan Ermakov has worked about a collective decision which changed the course of history. He worked indeed on the fact that in the 30s, the members of the German parliament voted for the abolition of the constitution of the Republic of Weimar by passing an enabling bill giving Hitler the right to bypass any parliamentary supervision. And what shows Ermakov, if we leave aside his theoretical framework, which is a bit strangely based on a theory of rational choice. So if we follow Ermakov, the collective abdication of parliamentarians results from two kinds of social appraisal, which are exacerbated by the psychological and the political uncertainty of the course of events. The first social appraisal involves what Ermakov calls a behavioral alignment. It involves the local face-to-face alignment between parliamentaries who are close to one another during the 3 hours of the session that end up with the vote of the unconstitutional bill. And the second social appraisal is what Ermakov calls an inferential alignment. It is based upon the public stance of the representatives of the most important political parties in presence. So although Ermakov describes these two kinds of alignments as rational decision in situation of indecision, it would be interesting to describe these two kinds of appraisal from an emotional standpoint. Most likely it is an emotional mixture of fear, despair, and need to belong that lead parliamentarians to defer the decisions to important public figures. So the new distinction I would like to establish, a new distinction for me at least, I would like to emphasize the distinction we could make between collective emotions with this kind of social appraisal and alignment and the public emotions. What are public emotions? To understand it, we have to characterize collective emotions as first as ephemeral, reactive emotion to a problem that concerns different individuals and can quickly fade away. One of the characteristics of the collective emotion, we have seen that this morning, that they are very often short and short-living. But collective emotion can also get crystallized. So we can draw from the distinction between different states of opinion proposed by Ferdinand Tönnies a long time ago. We can distinguish between three states of public emotions characterized by different degrees of crystallization. We can speak of gaseous emotions, which are temporary, fluid emotions that circulate a lot under different forms and in different arenas. But gaseous emotion can also get crystallized in two main ways. The first way is to turning into affective disposition, embodied anticipations or background expectancies. this crystallization has interested in a lot of historians who work by definition also about the long-term mentalities, for instance. But as a good example of this affective disposition, we can use the work of Edward Thompson of what he calls the moral economy of the poor. It's the idea that the practices of solidarity, expectation of justice, and kind of affective dispositional towards other prevailed among the dominated in the 18th century. The second way in which collective emotions can get crystallized is when they are sustained by institutions and become public emotion. So what I propose to call public emotions are emotions which are scaffolded by official discourses and narratives, such as political speeches, news reports, or ordinary gossip. So even after becoming public, collective emotions can even get more crystallized and become what Andrea Saggio calls constitutional feeling. That is feelings that lead to legal decision essential for a collectivity, like a death penalty. So public discourses and institutions can be seen as giant devices of social appraisal to which people tend to defer, relying on them to define what is worth attending upon. To get quickly, because I see Gloria getting nervous. Okay. Okay. So one of the main characteristics of public emotion is that they function as Tuomela calls positional beliefs. It's the emotions that people are supposed to accept and publicly endorse as members of a given group, but emotions that they do not necessarily feel as a private person. So positional emotions have normative dimensions. They function as feeling rules, rules so that group members are supposed to feel. So these positional emotions are essential because they draw the boundaries of what the historian William Reddy calls an emotional regime. It's the idea that an emotional regime endows bodies with value and aligns them in relation also to emotional ideologies. For instance, by depicting outgroup members as a threat, nationalist emotions redefine political and moral boundaries between communities. And also this kind of positional emotion delimit new action tendencies like proper to collective fear, for instance, security, invasion, prevention, and etc. So one characteristic of these public emotions is the fact that they are not necessarily anchored in bodily co-presence or bodily synchrony, or they are not necessarily anchored in the neural we or the phenomenal we as spoke of before. So the characteristic of these public emotions is they are sustained by textual artifacts, text-mediated relationship. They are very often distant from local bodily eye experiences. So such imagine disembodied we proper to public emotions relies essentially on devices of social appraisal, for instance, mass media, political discourses. But they are also present in other kinds of collectives, like the movement of internet activists, Anonymous, which is a very good, excellent case to reflect on collective emotion, because the we emotions of Anonymous, mainly anger, indignation, and hope, have the strange specificity to be without any eyes, because Anonymous is people, members of Anonymous are masked, don't supposed to exist as individual persons. So to finish, I would like to take an example, which is the Charlie press conference, which was given by Luz just after the Charlie attack in January. And it's a good way to reflect on the different distinctions I try to unfold just before. So what is the story around Charlie Hebdo? Is so Luz, the cartoonist of Charlie Hebdo, officially presents the cover of the so-called survivors issue. And during the press conference, the collective emotion that Luz calls for is sadness and forgiveness. So he tries to transcend group membership, invites his addressees to become part of a universal collective subject made of compassion. But of course, the offer of forgiveness must be uptaken in order to meet its end. We can compare the kind of emotional communities and the kind of public emotion which are valued within different societies, because, for instance, in the Guardian, which is an English newspapers, the emotional relationship proposed by Luz, reconciliation, is preserved. And also the article specifies that only fundamentalists and not Muslims might be angry against the cover. On the other hand, the New York Times does not validate the emotions expressed by Luz, describing the caricature of Mohammed as an emotional act of defiance. Charlie is labeled as an irreverent and often provocative newspapers. And this irreverence is linked with threats of more violence. So New York Times reduced Charlie cover to a blasphemy. And the emotional account of Charlie's new cover afford for them only one appropriate response: anger and indignation. In other words, the New York Times anticipates and endorses the emotional preferences of fundamentalists. It makes unspeakable the act of forgiveness that Luz meant to perform, and prevent Charlie from performing another action than that of insulting. So in this case, the New York Times operates as an institutional agent that regulates public emotions, in this case by univocally enforcing the rules regarding blasphemy. So the failure of Luz's attempt to create a new emotional collective shows very well that collective emotions, to be successful, must be validated by their addressees, but also by the institutions playing a key role in the cascade of social appraisal that characterize the public life.
Okay, so let's thank Laurence Kaufmann. So now let me introduce our second speaker for this session, Paolo Gerbaudo, who comes from King's College, London. He's a sociologist. He's the director of the Center for Digital Culture at the King's College in London. And so he will speak about digital enthusiasm and the formation of online crowds. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. I mean, I'm the director of the Center for Digital Culture, but I'm having a digital technology drama with my iPad, and I was thinking that this might be a reason why Western Buddhism is rising so much at the time of digital technology, because you really need proper concentration and calm to sometimes cope with the disaster of digital technology. So while we try to solve the technology problem, I'll just improvise. I'm Italian, of Italian upbringing, so Italians are quite good at improvising in emergency situations. So that's something that has saved my life in a pair of occasions, and I hope it's going to be the case also this time. So I'll tell you a pair of things about me. I've done a lot of research about social movements and social media. I've written a book with a very cheesy title, Tweets and the Streets, which looked at the social movements of 2011 and the social media of 2011. When I say social movements of 2011, I'm talking about the Indignados in Spain, I'm talking about the Arab Spring. I had the opportunity to be in Egypt for a year and a half around the time of the revolution. I'm talking about Occupy Wall Street and all these various movements. As you might guess, now that I'm here in Paris, I'm looking forward to going to Place de la République to see what is going on with Nuit Debout, right, which can be seen as a sort of last instantiation of this new cycle of protests that began in 2011 and that shares a number of characteristics. It's not just a temporal coincidence, right, but it's also a coincidence in forms of action. There is a coincidence in ideology, I would argue. In fact, my forthcoming book, titled The Mask and the Flag, looks at ideology, at the ideology of what I call, with a very provocative term, anarcho-populism, as the common ideology of these protest movements. And another common feature of these protest movements has been the use of social media, Facebook pages, Twitter channels, and so on and so forth. What I'm presenting today is basically one aspect of this aspect of social movements activity, that is the way in which they use social media and the way in which, more precisely, they use social media as a means of emotional mobilization. Yeah? That's why I was invited, and I'm very glad I was invited to speak about this. My talk today draws on a paper that I recently published on the Online Journal of Communication, and the paper is titled Digital Enthusiasm and Emotional Contagion. And that's very much, these are very much the two concepts I want to focus on in this presentation. Digital enthusiasm and an emotional contagion. And the third term being online crowds. Yep. So what am I talking about when I talk about digital enthusiasm? I mean, first and foremost, enthusiasm is possibly the quintessential revolutionary emotion, right? I mean, if you look at Georges Roud, the French crowd, if you look at Charles Tilly accounts of what he calls contentious gatherings, if you look at a number of both, say, political, pundit accounts, as well as more sociological accounts, you encounter again and again enthusiasm as a key component of revolutionary moments. Revolutionary moments are enthused moments, are moments in which people feel this common sense of enthusiasm, which can be described as an overwhelming positive sentiment of hope, of confidence, right, which is constantly reinforced by mutual interactions. There is a sort of constant surpassing of people's expectations as they see other people behaving in ways that are beyond what they expected from them, right? For example, when I was in Egypt, something that people were saying on and on when they recounted their experience of Tahrir Square was the fact that they didn't know that the Egyptian people were as good as they discovered they were. There is this ethical process whereby people are surprised by how good they are or by how good other people are, right? And therefore there is this sort of spiral, this ascending spiral of interaction, of communicative interaction, which is paralleled by an increasing positive emotional activation. As people become more and more confident, more and more hopeful, yeah? But obviously, as you might imagine, as all spirals, it will have at some point a climax, a pinnacle, from which it can only descend, right? Might be the point when instead of seeing your expectations about other people's behavior being surpassed, you are disappointed by them, right? And then in turn can create a feedback process in the contrary sense, where instead of an ascending spiral, you have a descending spiral, right? Which is not euphoria, but say its opposite, dysphoria, right? Where progressively people are taken by a negative collective mood, which is the opposite of the positive collective mood, which is enthusiasm, and they end up basically going in the very opposite direction they were going on towards before. So this is more generally a phenomenon that we see in all protest movements. My paper discusses how this is reflected in online discussions, in online conversations. I mean, we all know, anybody who has some interest in protest movements, that nowadays Facebook pages, Twitter channels, Periscope, you name it, is becoming more and more the new public sphere of protest movements, the new space in which protest movements organize their conversations, circulate informations, and mobilize people. Often, however, especially in the American political science tradition, we have this very narrow, hyper-rationalist, informational view of communication. Communication as a pure transfer of information, as a pure transfer of packets of information. As if everything activists did was saying, hey, let's meet today at 7:30 in Place de la République. As if the channeling of information was enough in activating people and in facilitating, inciting protest action. The key claim I made in my work, in this book, Tweets on the Streets, and in my ensuing papers, was that instead social media were key as emotional media. As media that chiefly revolved around processes of emotional activation and emotional contagion, which would facilitate processes of mass mobilization in a situation in which you don't have mass organizations. That is basically the surprising thing, right? I mean, usually all mass protest movements were mobilized by mass organizations, parties, trade unions, and so on and so forth. Instead, in this case, you have mass mobilization without mass organizations. My claim there is that this gap is filled through emotional mobilization, by using social media, among other tools, as a means to create this overwhelming feeling of collective enthusiasm, which in turn motivates people to participate in protest. So the way I define moments of digital enthusiasm are ephemeral phases of intense, positive, emotional mood, which emerge in political online conversation in proximity to major protest events. And again, this is already what I said before, they are characterized by an ascending spiral of collective emotional activation, which culminates in impressive spikes in user engagement, right? We saw that many emotional processes tend to have these very high spikes, and the same applies also to moments of digital enthusiasm. My connected claim is that the cause of digital enthusiasm is emotional communication, or more precisely, emotional conversation, emotional dialogue of the type that develops on Facebook pages, on Twitter channels, and a dialogue that involves two partners, two different actors, right? It is not, as we are often told, an horizontal dialogue where anybody is just talking with anybody else, right? It's not a many-to-many dialogue alone. It is, in fact, a dialogue that is quite hierarchical, right? And that is something that is also a key argument I've made in my work. We often take social media to be a hyper-democratic space, but then I have 2,500 followers and Justin Bieber has 90 million followers, right? So I wish I was as popular as Justin Bieber, but I'm not, right? And you, in fact, see this Pareto distribution, this power law, almost everywhere in social media in very strong ways. The consequence of this is that you have two different actors that are at different levels, differently positioned in the hierarchy of communication. On the one hand, you have the activists, the admins, the page admins, the system admins of social media accounts that are becoming more and more leaders by virtue of the fact that they control accounts. And you have common users, the vanguards and the crowds of contemporary social movements. these two actors are engaged in two processes that are determining the explosion of moments of digital enthusiasm. Moments of digital enthusiasm are not completely spontaneous, as social movements are not completely spontaneous. I'm sure that if you have read accounts recently of Nuit Debout, you will have read some accounts saying it was all spontaneous, people came together, right? I mean, for sure, there was a kind of strong energy there. There was a strong willingness, collective willingness to do that. But I'm sure, not having done any research about it, there was also some form of core group, right? Or a more activated section of the movement that had a more strategic position that in turn facilitated the collective mobilization. Yeah? And the same applies to digital enthusiasm. Digital enthusiasm is often engineered. One activist from Occupied put it to me this way: you need to create enthusiasm until you have real enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is constructed, is designed, is deliberately produced by activists acting as movement leaders. And you see that in the construction of a hopeful narrative in these conversations, where activists are very deliberately giving you a hopeful message that hopes to work as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then I will show you some examples of that. Yeah? The second component of that is the spontaneity component, if you want to put it like that, right? I mean, I'm not denying that there is an element of spontaneity, there is an element of authenticity, if you want to call it like that. That is, moments of digital enthusiasm arise not just when they are deliberately designed, but also when there is a positive response to them. When there is a receptivity and an active cooperation by online users who identify themselves, recognize themselves in the narrative that is offered to them, and then actively contribute to the discussion, in so doing reinforcing the positive narrative that is proposed by page admins, right? And they, in so doing, give way to these positive feedback that produce the ascending spiral I talked about. The two case studies I use in this paper, my presentation is based on, are two of the most famous Facebook pages used by the 2011 movements. The Kullena Khaled Said, We Are All Khaled Said Facebook page. There was the Facebook page that famously launched the Facebook event that officially announced the starting date of the 25th of January Egyptian revolution. Yeah? And the other case is Democracia Realia, a famous anti-corruption, anti-austerity, pro-equality, pro-democracy group in Spain that also had its own Facebook page. We're talking about Facebook pages, not like our Facebook pages. I don't know how many of you have Facebook pages, or we're talking about Facebook pages of, in the Egyptian case, of 4 million people. In the Spanish case, around 500,000 people. They are very, very large Facebook pages, which can be considered some sort of mass media, right? The kind of audience they had, because now Facebook pages don't have the same visibility anymore because of changes in the algorithm of Facebook, but the visibility they had back in the days was comparable to a small television channel, right? And in so doing, they also produced effects that you would normally associate with mass media. So what we find when we look at these Facebook pages is that there is a very clear trend, a very clear pattern in user engagement. I mean, user engagement is the sum of a number of interactions. Likes, right? We all know what likes are, I hope. Comments, shares, right? If you aggregate that, you get user engagement. I mean, you can either aggregate it or use coefficients, right? But I hope you get the point. So this is the Democracia Realia, the Spanish Indignados Facebook page. Guess what the spikes coincides with? I don't know how many of you can read that, but guess what the spike coincides with? It coincides, obviously, with the advent of the 15th of May protest, the day that launches the Indignados movement. So you have a small growth that you can see. You cannot really see that there because the scale is too big for you to see that. You have a small growth, slow growth, say, and then at some point you have a spike, which shoots up, and then after the spike, you have some minor spikes again, and then it plateaus, it flattens. It goes down to the, basically the level of you saw before the spike. Yeah? Same thing you see in the Kullena Khaled Said Facebook page. Yeah? You see a number of spikes coinciding with protest events, I mean, usually preceding protest events and following them, and then falling down, then another spike, and then another spike. Right? If you take the longer view, I don't know if you can see that, you see that the highest spike there is in March, coinciding with a constitutional referendum in March 2011, where, unfortunately, Egyptians voted as the army taught them to vote, right? That was basically the last moment of enthusiasm, and then it goes down, right? It recedes, and once again, it reaches basically the bottom line. Yeah? So how, I mean, the first question I want to answer is, how did this happen? I mean, why do we see these spikes in user engagement? How are they produced, if they are produced? And what I found analyzing, doing a qualitative analysis of discourse, of the content posted on these pages, is that they were preceded by very intense emotional communication by page admins. I mean, take this message from the Kullena Khaled Said Facebook page. Today we are going to prove that we are not guys of comment and like as they claim. We are reality, capitalized, on hurt, we are demanding our rights, and we are all participating. Yeah? Self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Completely. How can you guarantee that that is going to happen, right? Nobody can guarantee that. Yet, that's the kind of paradox, precisely because there is a self-fulfilling prophecy, the prophecy is self-fulfilling, right? There is this anticipation, this kind of jump towards the future, this completely, how you say, irrational in a way, no? Not empirically based sense of hope, which is productive though, which in turn generates the conditions for mass mobilization, generates the sense of confidence, the sense of we are going to be many, which mobilizes people in protest action. Democracia Realia, a poor show of Spanish exuberance. No? Maybe exuberance is a stereotype of Spanish people, but I mean, here you have an empirical confirmation of that, right? Protests are growing like mushrooms in the entire country. The moment of revolution has come. 15th of May. Let's take all to the streets. Again, self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, a number of claims that are all exhortative, not informative at all. It's not telling you this is what has happened. It's not telling you this is the plan. It's telling you what they want, what is the desire that belies protest organizers. And the interesting thing is also that activists are skillfully using a number of tropes that are typical of social media platforms. For example, they're using metrics that we find in all social media platforms, like the numbers, the measures of likes, comments that we see next to every post on Twitter or Facebook, as a tool of persuasion of the crowd. For example, on the Democracia Realia page, on the April 10th, we already have 20,000 indignant followers on Facebook, exclamation mark. On April 26th, we already have 30,000 indignants confirming their participation in the state event, in the national event, more properly said. Invite your contact and let's continue growing, right? So you see, like, there are these connected elements. On the one hand, exhortation, let's continue growing, but exhortation also based on objective elements. That is, look, the metrics say that we are growing and growing. Yeah? There is a demonstration that our narrative is growing. So there is a sense of, there is a sort of circularity. No, instead of horizontality, that is a term often used both by activists and by social media managers, possibly the term that best describes the type of interaction and emotional interaction going on social media platform is circularity. There is a very strong and very rapid feedback effect that, connects leaders and led, followers and leaders, yep, in a way that can be very effective in facilitating emotional processes and motivating people to participate in protest action. I mean, I cannot really go into comments that are the way people mostly interact qualitatively, besides likes. What you see is that in many of these cases, you also have supportive comments that are redoubling the positive narrative proposed by page admins. It's not just the page admins are exuberant, also users, or their majority, are. If page admins are saying the revolution is going to happen, they say yes, tomorrow. Yeah? Take this Egyptian script comment. Egypt, with many Ys, right? A typical trope you find in social media conversation. Long live Egypt, long live the people, long live the nation, down with corruption. Yeah? So there you have not just a mimicking, but really a redoubling of the positive narrative offered by users. So here moving towards some conclusions, because I think my time is... All right, so I can slow down. I spoke like a machine gun. Now I'm going to slow down a little bit. So the reason why I think this is interesting is because it offers some teachings about different problems that people in the field of digital sociology, digital anthropology, are all interested in. Yeah? I mean, the first question is the one I touched upon before, and is really the kind of informational-emotional divide. Yeah? So what you see there is that these pages, these accounts, these conversations are not really much about information as such. I mean, obviously information is there, right? But it's impossible to reduce it to purely cognitive processes. I mean, to do simply with telling people what to do, where to go, right? The fundamental element responsible for activation of people, for their mobilization, ultimately, is an emotional process. Construction of collective hope, construction of a sense of confidence, construction of a sense of urgency. 15th of May is our day, right? That social media are very good at facilitating, right? Because social media are very much an event-based, event-focused media. It's not a random fact that one of the most important social media features used by activists was the Facebook event feature, right? Where you fix a date, fix a place, fix an action, and say, hey, let's all gather in this point in space and time. Let's all come together. Yeah. Is in a way a design of moments of collective effervescence, if you want to use Durkheim's formula, right? Which then has also more complex implications because it raises questions of why is this happening? Why do we need to design crowds? Why do we need to design collective effervescence? Is it because we live in an era that, as Marxist autonomists tell us, is an era of extreme dispersion, of labor, of social experience, right? In which the factory as a central space of production and organization is not there anymore, and also crowds are not there anymore as they might have been there in previous historical eras, and therefore protest movements need to deliberately create crowds. I mean, I think Nuit Debout is possibly an example of that, right? If you think about that movement, is a movement that whose main focus, whose main aim ultimately, at least at this stage, is to create the crowd. Then let's see what happens with it, right? It doesn't really set what is going to happen with that crowd. It aims at creating the conditions in which something can then happen, right? And I think that is really curious, really interesting, and interesting precisely because it's a reflection of contemporary social dilemmas. Dilemmas of a society in which connection, in which the connection offered by social media, connectivity, goes hand in hand with isolation, individualization, and dispersion, right? It's a kind of double-edged sword. Yeah? The second element that is interesting for me is the sheer productivity of these processes. The fact that indeed they have an incredible efficiency, at least in a short time span. Right? I mean, it's amazing that, again, movements that had no mass organization, no paid workers, no paid officers, very little resources, I mean, almost no monetary resources, could manage such feats of mobilizing, in certain cases, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. It bespeaks, indeed, some of the positive opportunities that are inherent in social media. Not much because Zuckerberg and the likes are philanthropists, but because in order to make money, they need at the same time to create some space in which people can produce conversations, and sometimes people can use that opportunity in ways that are disruptive towards the power structure. The other important thing that it shows is something that theorists of online mobilization have often underlined, that is that one of the key challenges mobilizing people online is to overcome the skepticism and the cynicism that is inherent in online interactions. And it has to do precisely with the condition of isolation from which we connect. There was an interesting article on The Guardian talking about Generation Z, the post-millennials, saying that something they shared from a point of view of social experience was this experience of loneliness in front of the screen, right? I mean, often we get this positive narrative about social media being about socialization, community, sharing, yeah? And it is partly true, there's no denial of that, but it goes hand in hand with this negative experience of isolation and loneliness, right? And that is what, in a way, can explain the exuberance we see in this conversation as a way to overcome the high barrier produced by this sense of skepticism and cynicism inherent in online communication. The third, say, question that I think is raised by this study and by this phenomenon is the evanescence of these processes, which in turn is also a reflection of the evanescence of these movements. In this book I'm now publishing on the 2011 wave, a key finding, but it's not really a surprising finding, is that all these movements evaporated really fast. They reached very impressive heights, they gathered many people, but then they almost invariably failed in creating some level of continuity. Yeah. Partly this might well have to do with the affordances, with the quality of communication on social media and of moments of digital enthusiasm. The fact that the very architecture of these platforms facilitate virality, facilitate contagion, facilitate very rapid emotional interactions that can produce feedback circles. Yet at the same time, this very process can also go the other way, right? Precisely because it gets viral very fast, it can also get unviral very fast, right? It can also be sedated or evaporated very fast. So to conclude and sum up a bit the findings of my paper, which is called, again, Digital Enthusiasm and Emotional Contagion in Egypt and Spain in the 2011 protest, we find a sort of mixed bag picture where we find both power and fickleness, where we see the capacity of activists to exploit the emotional affordances of social media, but also the risk to fall prey of liquidity. Yeah. It demonstrates the power of emotions and of emotional communication in a digital era, but also how the power of emotions, relying on emotions, can in turn become a liability for protest movements. And I think that this can teach us many things, not just about protest movements, but more in general about digital politics, right? For example, about party politics. If we look at Bernie Sanders, if we look at Trump campaigns in the US, we see that they are using, to a great extent, similar processes, similar dynamics. But will they also, for that reason, fall prey of the same problems protest movements fell prey of? Thanks. Yeah.